Welcome to the New Thinking for a New World podcast, where we explore the most pressing issues that are challenging and changing our societies. We are looking for new thinking and new solutions wherever we can find them. Listen as host Alan Stoga, the Talberg Foundation's chairman, challenges his guests for analysis, ideas and actions. Together, we can help make our world at least a bit better.
A few weeks ago, Belarus shocked the world when it forced a commercial flight from Athens to Vilnius to land and seized 2 passengers, one a dissident journalist. But that outrage was only the most recent affront to international law and accepted state behavior by Belarusian autocrat Alexander Lukashenko, and more importantly, his patron, Russia's Vladimir Putin. For years, Putin has increased pressure on the countries along its border. Cyber attacks on Estonia and Ukraine, war with Georgia and then Ukraine, the seizure of Crimea, constant air and naval border violations, as well as aggressive disinformation campaign aimed at many countries, but in particular the Baltic countries. Lithuania is a frontline state in the growing confrontation between East and West. In this episode of New Thinking for a New World, we'll explore what Putin and Lukashenko want and what leaders and people of Lithuania, as well as their allies, can and should be doing. My guests are Dalia Bankauskaitė, a defense and security expert at Vilnius University, and Marius Laurinavičius, a journalist and analyst at the Vilnius Policy Institute. Welcome, Dalia and Marius.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Lithuania's prime minister recently described the Belarus incident as an attack on the EU. Her interior minister said that a hybrid war was being waged against Lithuania, and your president has warned that Lithuania could become another Crimea. Those are incredible statements to someone sitting safely thousands of miles away from you. Do you agree with them? Is war, hybrid or otherwise, actually possible? Are we already there, as some would suggest? How bad is it?
Well, from my perspective, I would talk not just about the Baltic states. I would talk about the war which is waged against all the West, including United States. And this is the main thing I want to convey. It's not just about Ukraine. It's not just about Baltic states. It's not just about Europe. It's mainly, and I would like to stress it, it's mainly against United States. If we talk about Russia, particularly, let's leave Belarus for a moment. But if we talk about Russia, the main opponent or adversary, it's a main enemy of Russian mafia regime is United States. And what they do in our countries, in the Baltic states, sooner or later, you will see in the United States.
Dalia, what do you think?
To follow up Marius' thoughts, fully agree. Lithuania is a small country, and Russia is playing a power game. So they're addressing big states, superpowers like United States. Lithuania, although a millennium-old state, is a neighborhood to Russia for a millennium, for thousands of years. And the history of those two countries, the history of neighborhood, unfortunately, leaves very little for Lithuania to trust its neighbor, Russia. And now we have to talk also about Belarus, because when we say Belarus, we immediately think about union of states, and especially, and moreover, the union of military union of those two countries, Belarus and Russia.
We have just had a NATO summit. We've just had a series of summits as President Biden made his first trip to Europe. Certainly the rhetoric coming out of those meetings does not match the situation you just described. Do you think people in Brussels, in Berlin, in Paris, but most of all in Washington, understand the threat that you have just described in the same terms?
I'm afraid that people in the United States and even in Europe, most of them, and mostly politicians, I'm not talking about people from the security services, from this kind of from some of the think tanks, but I'm talking about politicians because what I tried to say previously, that it's not just about Baltic states, it's not just about Ukraine, it's not just about Europe as such. This message is not fully understood in United States. Unfortunately, it's not fully understood in let's say in Germany. These people who are trying to support, let's say, this project of Nord Stream 2 pipeline, they don't understand that this mafia regime, because it's really, when we talk about Russia, it's not just about a normal, so-called normal authoritarian state. It's a mafia state. And this mafia state with such kind of projects, this mafia state comes to other countries like Germany or any other country. And this part of the problem that what we are facing. The main question is what we're facing, and this part of the problem is not fully, at least fully understood in the West.
What's amazing about that to me, and I suspect to both of you, is that there have been a whole series of behaviors over the last 20 years that are increasingly aggressive, that violate international law, that throw aside international norms, and that is both internally and externally. Yet we seem more willing in the West to whistle past the graveyard than to actually acknowledge what's going on. I would point out, Dalia, even the most recent, the Protashevich issue. Yes, the media looked at it for a few days, and yes, every time they paraded him before the cameras, we had outrage, in air quotes, but no action, or no real action, out of either the Europeans or the Americans. Am I being too harsh? Or are we just being collectively too stupid? How do you explain the fact that we don't seem, and by we I mean the Europeans in general, the Americans in particular, don't seem to recognize the behavior of what Marius has called a mafia state?
It's a huge question, and it's on the other hand, the answers that I could produce is it's perceptions. It's perceptions of human beings. Politicians are also human beings with their value system, with their life experience and perceptions. And the perceptions of threats really differs across Europe and the United States, combined with their daily life, with their collective memory or daily experience, as well as just interest. The liberal democracy, the Western world, really has enjoyed the luxury of peace, for living in peace and in the welfare states for quite a while. And it's to some extent, it's also laziness and cynicism, since it is not in your courtyard, not to question, not to be lack of understanding the other situation, as well as disability or laziness to think in a geopolitical terms. Because what we have next door, and this is what we talk about again, I want to come back to Russia and Belarus, that we have next door the signals of that those two countries are ready to act together, react in a very rapid way, as they did with hijacking the air flight, or in previous measures, or how Lukashenko was slaughtering his own people and torturing its own society. They are also ready to be united military. There are air bases for Russia in Belarus. Zapad is in September, very soon, and the ground for exercises is also next door. So I think that the West is to some extent getting lazy, don't want to get more troubles. So they switch they limit themselves to this deep concern, as I call it, street noise, this political rhetoric of deep concern, which is street noise that we no longer listen or hear. Both Belarus and Russia either does not ignores that and ventures further. So I would call really the Western world to agree upon the threats and prioritize threats and be really very serious and responsible. It's not only real politics; it's also about the values, the morale in politics, which is matter and which is important now. Yeah, that's my answer. That's my thoughts.
To follow up on that, the question is, and you can take it in either direction, what do Putin and Lukashenko want? Or what do you think they might do next? Since they clearly live in a world where they're playing by different rules than the rest of us. Quite successfully, by the way.
I would suggest to put it into very simple terms. Putin and Lukashenko are two criminals who are with criminal regimes behind them. And we are told that, let's say, the latest from the President Biden is that we don't want any confrontation with Russia. So that means that we know that we have, because Biden himself, he told that Putin is a killer. And he recognizes that Putin is a killer, but he don't want a confrontation with a killer. So that is the main problem. We admit some simple things. We don't want to talk about these things, at least extensively, because the main thing is to understand what we face. And even when we admit, we say, okay, let's cooperate with a killer, let's cooperate with criminal, at least in these fields we can cooperate. So how can you cooperate with a killer? How can you cooperate with a criminal as such? How can you cooperate with terrorists? Because these regimes, I don't have any distinction between Putin's regime and Lukashenko's regime in Belarus. So these regimes are even the same as terrorists. Let's imagine what would have happened if weapon of mass destruction would have been used by terrorists, and that have been done by Putin, and not in Russia, in United Kingdom, in NATO country. I'm fully convinced that in case any other terrorist would use weapons of mass destruction, we would have the other war on terror. Now, we don't have anything like that. We don't want to admit that. We don't want to do anything with that. That's the problem.
So the clear implication of what you both have just said is we ought to expect more of this behavior in the next months and perhaps years.
If you let any criminal to commit a crime and you wouldn't punish him or her for that, you will get the next crime. And the next crime will be more serious than the previous one. So that is absolutely the same situation. As long as we will not punish them, and not only punish, but stop them, they will commit other crimes, and any next crime will be even more severe than the previous one.
Agatha Christie actually confirmed or repeated in her stories, detective stories, that criminals commit crimes because they are sure that they are not going to be punished. So it's like the answer.
Which in geopolitical terms would tell us that, yes, this constant messing around in your countries being the Baltics, all along their border, they clearly want to sustain this chaos that is somehow in their interest because no one's going to stop them.
We've seen that with just some 2 months ago when Russian troops were massively deployed on the border with Ukraine. So that was not a game. Of course, this time it didn't went to any full-scale aggression. But at the same time, it's not a game. What they do on purpose. And we know that what they have done in Georgia, what they have done in Ukraine, in Syria, in other countries. So what is a reason not to think that they can repeat anything as we know, and even go further, because as we already discussed, the next crime will be more severe than the previous one. So we can't exclude anything, just anything.
If you feel that the world lacks global leaders, please help support the Thalberg Foundation programs. Individual donations are being accepted at thalbergfoundation.org/donate. That's TALLBERG foundation.org/donate.
Dalia, there are reports recently of increased number of migrants being pushed towards Lithuania through Belarus. The weaponization of migration is something we've seen in the southeastern part of Europe. Is that happening, in fact, on your border?
Absolutely correct. What we observe, it's a flood of illegal migration or illegal migrants crossing Lithuania and Belarus border. This is a 600 kilometers long border, NATO and EU border with Belarus. And weaponization is straightforward since migrants come from Syria, from Iraq, Iran, from Northern Africa, and moreover, it's also smuggling tobacco and smuggling drugs. So it's not only illegal migrants that later on they try to disappear, to get lost in Europe, but it's also the increased flow of drugs to the European Union and to the West. As you know, drugs, there are routes of drugs from Afghanistan crossing Russia to the West, to Europe, as well as there are drug routes from Venezuela. And the crossroad is Russia's territory. So now this border is used as a tool for exercising, for attacking not only Lithuania, but also all European space. Coming back, I wanted also to make a point about risk threshold. We talk about deterrence and defense, and it's so important that Russia's risk threshold is very high. It means that they venture into the areas where they really calculate and see no response. And only then they're excellent in calculating, and only then they venture. We can talk about Crimea, seizing Crimea, or war against Georgia, or in Syria. They came as the winners, and there was no response, so they venture further. And since we talk about Russia-Belarus state, and the same action. So that's the pattern. Risk, very high risk threshold. If there's no response, they will venture further. Another thing is, I think I would invite to think a little bit strategically. And even if the United States are really focused, they're moving their focus to China and China's United States relationship, it's an opportunity for Russia. Because since there's no response, so we know from the history, no country can win a war running two fronts. Second World War, the closest one. So if United States keep its total focus only on China, and we know that Russia-China's relationship is rationally good because it's beneficial for both. So how can we deny that Russia will venture and take this opportunity to attack in different conventional and non-conventional ways the Western world? Lithuania, Baltic states, Poland is the front line.
That is very logical. You're certainly right. But we did just see the recent NATO summit, which focused more on China than Russia, apparently, which was clearly the American preference. It diluted the attention paid to Russia. And I'm sure that reflected the European desire to pretend that they don't live next to a mafia state, that they can have Nord Stream 2 and they can have better relations and they can reduce their military spending, as we're seeing proposals in Germany and elsewhere. Marius, does that scare you? Does it scare you that you're hearing exactly the wrong signals from your point of view out of these leaders, out of these summits?
Well, to tell the truth, I'm not scared. Firstly, I would say I would slightly disagree with you about NATO summit. From my perspective, how I read it, that at least even we can count even mentioning of Russia and China, and we will see that Russia have been mentioned much more times than China. Of course, China is emerging threat, and I agree. I fully agree with other people in the West that China's threat is not less, at least not less serious, even for such countries like Lithuania. It might sound strange, but I would say that at least in a long-term perspective, China's threat even for Lithuania or for Baltic countries is even bigger than Russian threat. The problem is that we, as a West, as a collective West, we can't see the whole picture, because it's not just Russia, just Belarus, just China, just Iran, or just Russia and China. Or we see small picture, small parts of the big picture, and we don't see that it's a war against the West, like a democratic society. I will put it even in similar terms like Huntington did. It's a clash of civilization. And the threat we face is from authoritarian regimes which aim to conquer, and I will use this term, just to conquer democracy and destroy democracy as such, all the Western world. So it doesn't matter if it's Russia or if it's China or if it's Iran. It's the threat against all of us. And we should do something together to secure ourselves from all these complex threats.
I couldn't agree more, but it raises the obvious question, why are we, and by we I mean the West generally, so bad at strategic thinking, so unable to take a long view and work it back in practical terms? so unwilling to defend democratic values as appears to be the case?
It's a very serious question, and it's a fundamental question about values, morale in politics, and about the perception of the world. It's really the time we live, the time when the question is about leadership, whether the Western values, liberal democracy prevails, or autocratic regimes. So far, currently autocratic regimes lead, unfortunately. Do we perceive that? Do we agree? Do we really have an agreement upon the threats? We use a lot of this rhetoric, as I call it, really street noise. It's just street noise, and we don't take action. I remember I was participating at some tabletop exercises, and there were many issues raised, but the only thing what I saw that how comes that the liberal democracy, having all these conditions and time living in peace, failed to develop political elite and leadership. We do not groom our citizens as leaders. We know what's wrong or bad, but we don't have this consolidated approach. Now, having said that, it would be wrong only to describe the problem, to admire the problem. Then we won't be different. It's important to see what should be done, proactively done. So the current leaders are smart people. I would really think about allowing to lead. More leadership, more and a quick understanding, taking the leadership and be aware that the threats are really next door. It's 600 kilometers long border, and we have 2 weeks ago we had the aircraft just hijacked, just like this, and no action should be taken. Isn't it cynical? Then because that could be lost very soon. So agreement on threats and really rapid reaction. There are so much of experience inside in the frontline countries. Why not to take this experience from the Baltic states, from Poland, from Visegrad countries? Why not to engage it and really empower, even if these countries are so small in comparison to big powers? But sometimes they talk matter, they talk business. So I would really encourage to endorse, to take advantage of the experience that we have as countries. Listen to us. We have the saying, it's better to be an hour before the departure of the train than 5 minutes after the departure of the train. So listen to the Baltic states, to the front line, Eastern front line.
Being on the front line does focus your mind. Marius, what should be done? Who should do what?
Well, just a quick follow-up on what just Dalia said. Just directly to your question, I'm fully convinced that a part of the problem is our mentality and our post-modern society, in which we are used already to think in this win-win formula. And the problem is that the other side, I mean, these authoritarian regimes, they simply don't accept this formula. Win-win situation for these authoritarian regimes doesn't work. They don't accept that it's even possible. They think, and this is really about thinking, about the mentality. They think that in these zero-sum game categories, and they think as long as they win, we should lose. So we are at war, and we don't want to accept it. And the first thing, if you want to win a war, you need to accept that you are at war, and this comes against our mentality. We don't want to be at war. we don't want to accept that we are at war, and that's the main problem. If we now, I will go to your second follow-up question, and we'll try to answer this. So the first thing is to accept what we have, in what situation we are, and what we face. If we will accept that, we will have many tools to achieve our goals. And there, again, I will slightly disagree with what you said previously about the situation with Belarus, because from my perspective, it is the first situation when, of course, it's not enough, but when the West, as a collective West, especially European Union, made something, at least something. It wasn't just deep concern. We agreed not to allow Belarusian planes to our airspace. We simply closed for our airplanes Belarusian airspace. We are talking on real sanctions. I mean, these real sanctions, not just this personal sanctions. We already do something.
Dalia, where do we go next? How do we get people to recognize, if you agree with Marius, that we are at war?
We are, definitely we are at war. And if we agree that it's not only conventional war, although we can quote cases of conventional war attacks as well, but we talk about also intangible hybrid wars. Definitely, we have at war, we are in confrontation. Acknowledgement that we are being realistic and understanding the situation is just the first crisis management condition. The second thing is also action plan and understanding your opponent, its mindset, its ability of the West and of the United States, not only be capable of listening to your opponent or even partner, but listening to and able to hear, not only think and then think that you listen and understand, and not to project your perception and expect that your opponents would think or behave the way you project, but really understand. And this is where I come back again to my part of the world, to my region. I follow Russia, I follow Belarus, and from the military point of view, we can see the signs of Sparta. It's like experience when you have a permanent military and permanent, fully functioning military all the time. They are living in the war conditions and they are thinking as if always staying in war. And as soon as we understand this mindset, it's neither good nor bad. This is the way they think. Their security and their safety is achieved, guaranteed at the expense of others' security and safety. As soon as you understand that mindset, you would perhaps then come to certain conclusions, and your perception of threats and the management and measures to cope with these threats would be slightly different, just rather and ensuring and then reaching the utmost goal for the West, stability and predictability in relations, globally, internationally.
Thank you very much, Dalia. Thank you very much, Marius. Hopefully this conversation will stimulate some conversation, because I think, as you've both pointed out, we need not just some realpolitik, we need some real understanding of the facts on the ground and a willingness to accept and confront them. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us. Please rate our show on Apple Podcast and subscribe. Meanwhile, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or you can subscribe to our newsletter at tallbergfoundation.org to learn more about our work. That's TALLBERG foundation.org. Thank you, and we'll be back again next week for another episode of Thalberg's New Thinking for a New World. This podcast was brought to you through the generous support of SNF, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation.